Trump failed to maintain his siege over the Strait of Hormuz, and is now resorting to increasingly desperate moves to save face on the global stage. The US naval blockade risks turning into a mockery, as more than 20 vessels reportedly transited the Strait of Hormuz in a single day despite the pressure. 5 of those ships are believed to have loaded cargoes from Iran itself, with 3 of them identified as LPG carriers, leaving Trump and his team reportedly stunned. Embarrassed by the apparent failure of the blockade, Trump is accused of ordering the seizure or hijack of an Iranian ship to reassert US dominance. Reports say US forces fired at and then hijacked an Iranian vessel, an act that Tehran described as outright piracy and theft on international waters. In response, Iranian drones were launched against US warships, a direct retaliation for what Tehran labeled Trump's act of piracy and theft. More than 20 vessels passed through the Strait of Hormuz just a day before the United States moved to seize that Iranian ship. According to data firm Plur, over 20 vessels transited the narrow Hormuz chokepoint on April 18 alone, even as tensions were nearing a boiling point. This was the highest number of ships recorded crossing the strategic waterway since March 1, highlighting a surge in traffic at a very sensitive moment. Out of the tankers that passed through Hormuz, 5 oil ships had last loaded their cargoes in Iran, despite the intense American scrutiny. 3 of those vessels were liquefied petroleum gas carriers, with one reportedly bound for China and another headed to India. Overall, the transit of these ships demonstrated that commercial traffic through Hormuz has continued, even as rhetoric and military moves escalated. Iran and the United States were locked in a tense tug-of-war, as Trump pushed ahead with a naval blockade aimed at choking Iran's key ports. At first, Iran chose to allow ships to continue sailing through the Strait of Hormuz, citing respect for the Lebanon ceasefire and a desire to avoid wider escalation. But later, Iran announced that it would move to close or heavily restrict the strait, pointing directly to the US naval blockade as the reason for this drastic step. As the ceasefire moves closer to expiry, the US has seized an Iranian cargo ship, adding fresh tension to an already volatile situation at sea. President Donald Trump announced that the US military carried out the seizure of the Iranian vessel on April 19. The US military also released footage showing Navy fire hitting the cargo ship while it was out at sea. According to reports, a US missile destroyer intercepted the ship as it allegedly attempted to head toward Iran. The Iran-flagged vessel was said to be traveling toward Bandar Abbas port when it was stopped, according to the US military. US officials say the ship ignored communications for more than 6 hours, which led forces to take action. The destroyer then reportedly ordered the crew to evacuate the engine room before opening fire to disable the vessel. Several shells from the warship's 5-inch Mk-45 gun struck the engine area, leaving the ship immobilized in the water. US troops later boarded the Iranian vessel and took control without meeting any further resistance. The ship is now in US custody following the operation, according to US Central Command. US officials say the vessel was taken into custody after it allegedly tried to break a US blockade on Iranian ports. Iran has strongly condemned the operation as armed piracy and theft, and has vowed retaliation over what it calls a violation of the truce. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "Today, an Iranian-flagged cargo ship named Tuska, nearly 900 feet long and weighing almost as much as an aircraft carrier, tried to get past our naval blockade, and it did not go well for them." The US Navy-guided missile destroyer USS Spruance intercepted the Tuska in the Gulf of Oman, and gave it a fair warning to stop. The Iranian crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engineer room. Right now, US Marines have custody of the vessel. The Tuska is under US Treasury sanctions because of its prior history of illegal activity. We have full custody of the ship, and are seeing what's on board. Iran has accused the United States of violating the ceasefire after attacking its cargo vessel in the Gulf of Oman. On April 19, US forces reportedly fired on the ship, disabling its engine before boarding and seizing it. President Donald Trump later confirmed the seizure, saying the vessel was under US sanctions. In response, Iranian media said drone attacks were launched targeting US warships operating nearby. Iranian officials described the strikes as direct retaliation for what they called a US act of aggression. Iran strongly condemned the incident and warned that further retaliation against the US would follow. Ibrahim Zolfagari said, and I quote, "The aggressor United States violated the ceasefire and committed maritime piracy by firing at an Iranian merchant ship in the waters of the Sea of Oman and landing a number of its terrorist marines on the deck of the vessel, disabling its navigation system. We warn that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran will soon respond to this armed piracy and retaliation by the US Army," unquote. The operation comes at a time of fragile ceasefire and growing uncertainty over ongoing diplomatic efforts. The US action also came just 2 days before the 2-week ceasefire with Iran was due to end. Meanwhile, Iran says it has no plans yet to attend the next round of talks in Pakistan.
$25 करोड़ गरीब गरीबी को परास्त करके बाहर निकले।
For the good of our nation, let's work together and let's truly make America great again.
The fastest news breaks.
Requested PM saying that we will have to speak to Putin and to Zelensky.
The biggest news makers.
The relationship with India is probably the most important bilateral relationship the US will have for the rest of this century.
The capital delivered quite an election result today.
Expert analysis.
The million-dollar question today is how to stop this dance of death.
Ground reports.
I'm standing at the crossroad of the Kumbh Mela. Behind me are more than 100 entry guards.
Long-form interviews.
Exclusionary politics is reflected in Manipur case as well. You don't bother because this is a small state.
Deep dive into burning issues.
It's often said DRC could be the richest country in the whole world. It's because of what sits underneath.
Why exactly did the US topple the Sheikh Hasina government?
HD videos. We don't just break news, we break it down.